Ois base. So, according to what we learned before, the difference between the Aron and the other Kalim is because the Aron's mitzvah to carry on the shoulder was for all generations, whereas the mitzvah to carry the other Kalim on the shoulders only applied to the time of the Midbar until the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So it turns out that the mitzvah to carry the Aron is a mitzvah l'doirish for generations to come. The mitzvah to carry the other kelim b'kosef was only temporary, and therefore that's not counted. A temporary mitzvah is not counted as part of the mitzvahs. But the Rebbe rejects this explanation. The Rebbe says there is an inherent difference between the mitzvah of carrying the Aron and carrying the other kelim. The Rebbe actually argues that the main mitzvah, even at the time of the Bnei Kahos, the original carriers of the Mishkan, also then the main mitzvah was because of the Aron. The Aron was not supposed to be put on a wagon, and that's why the Bnei Kohos were not given wagons. And from this already extended to all the other kelim that they also carry them. But the main mitzvah was on the Aron. The Rebbe is going to go now to prove this by bringing down from the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rambam, in which the Rambam doesn't make any distinction between these kelim of that they were carrying. If it is true, like the previous interpretation, that only this, the difference is because this is Ladoiris, the other kelim, Aron, but the other kelim were not, then the Rambam should have mentioned it. Let's look inside, base. This, however, is not sufficient to explain the difference between the Aron and the other kelim. Because how come, as the Rambam soll bechlal nit dermonen, that the Rambam should not mention at all, und afile nit merame sein, and doesn't even hint wegen dem Chiluk zwischen dem Aron und the andere Klei HaMikdash, and there is a difference between the Aron and the other Klei HaMikdash in an inyan for Maaseh B'Kosef. And the idea of Maaseh B'Kosef, that this is a lasting mitzvah, and this is a temporary mitzvah, why there's no mention of any Chiluk over there? So this is a question in the Rambam. He should have said something about it, but especially the Rebbe says in Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Tmiyah is noch starker, benegei Sefer HaMitzvahs. This prize is even bigger with regards to the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the book of mitzvahs of the Rambam. Was dort nicht starker l'hovi reis v'chulu. Over there, the Rambam brings evidence and brings proof. The mitzvah zu gufe is in this mitzvah, the Rambam goes into detail. The Rambam explains in this mitzvah, Sefer HaMitzvahs, that really the mitzvah of carrying on the shoulder is not for the Levi, it was really for the Kohanim. The Rambam explains the only reason why the Leviim were told to carry, there was not enough Kohanim to carry it. So therefore the Leviim got the job. But in the future generations, it was the Kohanim, not the Leviim, that carried the Aron. So, and in all this, there is no mention that the other Kelim, what about the other Kelim? It just ignores it totally. So it points to the fact that the actual mitzvah is not the other Kelim, it's only the Aron. Let's look inside. So what does the Rambam say? And he does detail in this mitzvah, he goes into details. Even though the command, the Rambam starts the halacha by saying that it's a mitzvah on the Kahanim. So the Rambam asks, even though that this command comes to the Levim at the time when they were carrying, it was the Bnei Kohos, the Levim that carried this. Because it was a small amount of people that are obligated in this mitzvah, they couldn't do it. Wasn't enough people. And so we see that he's talking about who's mechuyev, that it's literally the Kohanim, even though the pasuk it says the Levim, but he explains. So he goes into details, von deswegen, and yet still is afilu nit merames wegen dem chiluk zwischen Aron und der andere Nigleh and Chassidus. He doesn't even hint about a distinction between the Aron and the other holy vessels. Why is there no mention of that? So therefore, that tells the Rebbe that there is an inherent difference, not only because this is a mitzvah deris or not. And another argument the Rebbe brings to prove this point. Lefi Hanal, based on the above. So what's the real pasuk that we have that the mitzvah of the Aron is a continuous, whereas the other kelim are not continuous, is from the pasuk in the Navi, in where when Yeshua hid the kelim because of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, he told them, "Ein lachem maseh bekosif." You don't have any more a load on the shoulder. And that's why he told them, over there it talks about the Aron, that he hid the Aron, only specifically the Aron. So we see very clearly that what was the mitzvah that distinguishes the Aron, according to this explanation, is the fact that it was applicable even after the Mishkan, even after the Binyan Beis Hamikdash, until the destruction. He tells them, Ein lechem maseh bekosif, that applies to the Aron. So why does the Rambam not bring down this pasuk, which is the source of the difference for the Aron and the other kelim, which the Rambam is explaining the mitzvah of carrying the Aron? So is doch von dem pasuk Ein lechem maseh bekosif ashtar kereraya. It is a stronger proof as Masa Aron Bekosef is given Oich Nachon Binyan Hamikdash, that carrying the Aron on the shoulder also was applicable even after the Bigdash was destroyed, as opposed to the other Kelim. Und das bringt nicht der Rambam. So why does the Rambam not bring this? So that tells the Rebbe that besides perhaps the difference mentioned before, that this is Ladoides, this is not Ladoides, but there's an inherent difference between, even at the time by the Bnei Kohos, there's a difference between the mitzvah of carrying the Aron and carrying the other kelim. From them is mashma. So from this it appears, as the Rambam lemt on, that the Rambam accepts as the chiluk zwischen Maseh bekosuf for shara kelim or Maseh Aron bekosuf, that the difference between carrying on the shoulder of the other vessels and the carrying of the Aron on the shoulder is not as bishara kelim is the mitzvah geworden. It's not only that by the other vessels the mitzvah ceased after the building of the Beis Hamikdash, no more mitzvah, that mitzvah. And by the Aron it does a mitzvah l'doides, and by the Aron it's a continuous mitzvah. That's not the only difference. But there is also a difference, and mainly there's a difference between the kelim and the other and the Aron in the essence of the definition of the mitzvah. The mitzvah of carrying the Aron is in a different category than the mitzvah of carrying all the other kelim. Also, as it was there, not after the building of the Beis Hamikdash, or that it changed then. No, but even during the time of the Bnei Kohos in the Midbar, there is a difference, as the Rebbe will explain. But the fact that they ignore this totally and don't mention, the Rambam doesn't mention, not in Sefer HaMitzvahs and not in Yad, in the Sefer mentioned, and doesn't bring down the second proof, which tells us that this is a mitzvah l'doros, the Aron, and it does ignores this all, is mashma that there's a nafkamina, besides the fact, in the first suggestion, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe allows for the difference of before, yes, the other kelim were only for the time being, and the Aron is also for generations to come. But that's not the main. There's another difference. There's a difference in the gather, in the definition of carrying what the mitzvah is for the kelim and what the mitzvah is for the Aron. And now the Rebbe is going to say more than that. The Rebbe is going to say now more than that, that actually it's only about the Aron. Not only that there's a different definition, but the whole mitzvah is for the Aron. But since we didn't give them the kelim for the Aron, they were also carrying the other things. You say the Mizuyesh lever. More than this we can say. As the Rambam learned, that the Rambam's, though he learns this, as the Iker Tzivui Avoidas HaKodesh Aleim Bekoser Yisou. That when the Pasuk says the holy work of carrying the holy vessels is on the Bnei Kahos, and they don't get no agolis, they put it on the shoulder, Bekoser Yisou, and Likuva, in other words, that it has to be that way, you cannot carry it another way. Maybe there's a mitzvah to carry the others, but if you carry it otherwise, it's not, here is Likuva, you have to carry it only on the shoulder, applies only to the Aron. It's not if an Aron or not if Shar Kelim. It's only on the Aron, not on the rest of the vessels. And the Rebbe says this is Zaka, there is a source for this in the Medrash. In Medrash Rabbah, this is Mefurish, Vestate Mefurish in Medrash Rabbah, as it says explicitly in the Medrash Rabbah. Ma'ulin B'Shevet Levi, Mishpachas Kahos, the elevated, special, within the tribe of Levi, or the Kahos family. Shahoya ben Levi Noisen Masoi, a general Levi, a son of Levi. He would put his load, oy hakroshim, whether it was the beams of the Mishkan, oy habrichim, the rings or the adonim or the sockets, the brichim, the poles that held the Mishkan together, oy kol dover, or all other matters, alagolos. They would normally put everything on the wagons. Avol mishpachos kohos, but the family of kohos, hoyu toyanim bekisveim, they would load it on their shoulders. And it says very clearly here, they have no permission to put the Aron on the wagons. You see very clearly, it talks about the Aron. They had no permission to put the Aron on the Golos. Didn't give to the Nekos, says the Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah singles out and only says that they had no right to put the Aron onto the wagons. Their phone is moving. So from this is understood as their Iker Tam was Livnei Kohos Leinos Nagolos. The main reason why to the Bnei Kohos they didn't give them the wagons is to leave them Aron. That is because the Aron, it's all about the Aron in the Medrash Rabbah. Shaloi Hoyol Lehem Reshus Litin Aron Nagolos. They had no permission to give the Aron on the wagons, so it's clearly about the Aron. By the Aron is not the mitzvah, because of Yisrael, by the Aron we have the mitzvah, they must carry it on the shoulders. So, Memela, it's all about the Aron. The issue is, how do we see this in the Pasuk? The Rebbe is going to ask. But Pi HaMevur, the Rebbe brings another evidence that this Rambam is based on this Medrash Rabbah, because the two halachas that follow now in the Rambam are both following this Medrash Rabbah. It looks like the two halachas that Rambam took from this Medrash Rabbah. So we see that this is the basis for the Rebbe. Benegei the halacha shel achar zeh, based on what explained in the Mefarshim with regards to the law that follows in Rambam. What's the source for that Rambam? Dort in Rambam, over there in the Rambam. The Rambam writes over there that the people, the Kohanim that carried the Aron were walking backwards because we did not want their back to be towards the Aron. So the ones that were in the back, they were traveling with the Aron. So they traveled with the Aron and they were walking backwards because their backs could not be towards the Aron. So stay dort in when you carry on the shoulder, noisim ponim keneged ponim. They face the Aron face to face. Luchos, and their backs were to the outside. Upneim lifnim, their face faced the Aron, and their backs were outside. Where does the Rambam take this halacha from? So the Mefarshim explain, as their Mokir Deref is from them Medrash Rabbah. The source for this is from this Medrash Rabbah. Where is Mamshich? Because the Medrash Rabbah quoted before continues. There was another area, another matter in which the Bnei Kahos were elevated. Bnei Kahos hoyim chulu. Bnei Kahos hoyim mahalchim achoreihem upneihem la'aron. The Bnei Kahos would walk backwards and facing the Aron, kedei sheleilitin acher la'aron. So their backs, their behind should not be towards the Aron. So kumtuish. So according to, if this is the source of the Rambam, as the Mekoides from the Veda Halachas in Rambam seinen from themselves medrash, that the sources of both of these halachas and Rambam come from the same medrash. Beidin yonim shtein ze'achar zeh. Where both of these matters, the Aron that you have to carry on the shoulder, and also that you're not allowed to face backwards, you have to go face to face with the Aron. So, say one onto the other. So the two halachas that follow Rambam are exactly aligned with the two halachas that are brought down in Medrash Rabbos. So this is evidence that the Aron is the main mitzvah, and the others is not even part. They're only by the way, but the mitzvah is for the Aron. Which also gives us an explanation why we always talk about the kahos that they carry the Aron. Not only because the Aron was the most important of them, but that wasn't really the mitzvah. Apizei is move on, the Rebbe adds. Based on this, we understand. That we distinguish the many places when we talk about, the Bnei Kahos, they were loaded the Aron. Why do we only say the Aron? Even though they were carrying the other holy vessels as well. So besides the fact that the Aron was the most important, this is neat nor. So this is not only Valder Aron is Me'ula from Allah Keli, because the Aron is the one that is elevated, the most important of all the Kelim, and the most holiest of them. So that's why we mentioned that. That's not the only reason. But the Far Rut Mazel Shmoy, that's why we refer to them, the Levium, on the name of the Aron. They were to Unim, the most important Keli. Norval dos is given Zayit Iker Mitzvah. But also, but as the Rebbe explains now, this was their main mitzvah. The main mitzvah was Toyanei Ha'aron, they loaded the Aron. But the Rebbe asked, "V'daf ober verstehen die Hasbarim dem." But we still need to understand the explanation in this. Es is doch ein mikra yitze midei pshutei. The verse does not leave its simple meaning. In the pasuk, let's read the pasuk. What does the pasuk says? The pasuk doesn't make the distinction. The pasuk says he didn't give them the wagon, so they had to carry everything. Agolis to the Bnei Kos, he did not give these wagons. haben sie doch gemusst tragen auch die andere Klei HaKodesh bekosset. So they had to carry also the other vessels on the shoulder. There was no wagons for them. So what's the reason that we're making this distinction when the pasuk doesn't seem to distinguish them, and we're saying that the Aron is the mitzvah over there? You're not allowed to put it on the wagon, and by the other kelim, we're saying, oh, they're just carrying it on their shoulders because they didn't have any wagons to put it on, so they were forced to carry it on their shoulders. Where does that distinction appear in the pasuk? It doesn't seem that distinction in the pasuk. So that's what the Rebbe is going to explain in the sicha, the distinction where it comes from the pasuk, the oldest difference. Ois given. So now the Rebbe brings another halacha. The Rebbe brings the halacha, the Rambam, and explains some details in the halacha which seemingly are difficult and leads the Rebbe to the coming explanation to what the view of the Rambam. So let's see what the Rambam exactly writes and the Rebbe's questions on the Rambam here. Gimel. Wenn man das verstehen, behagdim habiyur in divrei harambam ba'aloch. So we'll understand this, that the Rebbe said before, that there's a distinction between the other kelim and the Aron, by first introducing the explanation in the words of the Rambam in the above halacha and Hilchos Klei HaMikdash. B'zelu Shemeh. And first quoting the Rambam. The Rambam says, when you bring the Aron from place to place, you don't lead it by putting the Aron on the animal or on a wagon. The mitzvah is to carry it on the shoulder. And then the Rambam brings in from the story from Tanakh. He says, Ulefi sheshokach David b'nosei al hagola, when he brought the Aron to Yerushalayim, so he went and he put it on the wagon. He forgot. He forgot that you're not allowed to carry it on the wagon. So that's why Nifrat's Perek V'uza. That's why there was a breach. He died in Shmuel Beis, Pasuk Vav, and Shmuel Zayin, Pasuk Hey over there, Divrei Yom Aleph, all the references in which the story is related. When they brought it from Beis Eved Adam Hagiti, they brought it to Yerushalayim, and he wanted to catch the Aron. He thought it was falling down, and so he died. So the Rambam references this. David made a mistake. He put the Aron on the Agol, and therefore there was a breach that took place. Ela mitzvah l'nosei al hakosev, but there is a mitzvah to carry it on the shoulder. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, ki avodas hakodesh aleim b'kosev yisod. The holy work, the work of carrying the Aron, is on them, on the Bnei Kahos, and therefore, by Kosev Yisod, they carry it on their shoulder. So, why does the Rambam bring down, the first issue the Rebbe has, why does the Rambam bring down the story with Uzzah, that he was died because David made the mistake? Rambam doesn't usually bring down the stories from the Tanakh. Why does he bring it down? And then also in the language, it seems like the Rambam split up this halacha in two parts. First, he says that there was a problem putting it on the wagon. And then he says, well, they should have carried on the shoulder. It seems like it's not, well, you have to carry on the shoulder, so you can't put it on the wagon. It seems like it's broken up into two parts. First, you can't carry it, what the Rambam is talking about. And then he says, you should be carrying on the shoulder. Let's look inside. We'll see the Rebbe analysis. So, darf man verstehen. So, we need to understand. The Rambam is the Sefer from Luchos halachos. The Rambam is a book, is a Sefer, which teaches halacha. Vos is negeyadola halacha der biur. Why is it important to us, the halacha, the explanation? Ulefi sheshokach David v'nosei al ha'akola nifretz peres be'uza. He said, because David forgot. He tells us a historical fact. Because David forgot, and he carried Aron on the wagon. Nifretz peres be'uza. That's when there was a breach be'uza. Okay, so now, why does the Rambam bring it down? Now, the Rebbe is going to deal for a minute to try to figure out, maybe we have an explanation why the Rambam brings it down. Maybe the Rambam brings this down because here we see in the times of David, which was later than the Midbar, there's still a mitzvah for the Aron. That's the evidence that the mitzvah, like the Rebbe was in the beginning of the sicha, bringing out that the mitzvah was lidoris, that it's for a later generation, because we see what happened by David. So maybe we can say, the Rebbe wants to bring out something else, but the Rebbe deviates for a minute and saying, maybe we can possibly say, as from them is the Rambam Machriach, that this is, from this the Rambam proofs, as Naso Aron Bekosev is given a chiyuv mitzvah oichon zman from midbar, that carrying the Aron on the shoulder was an obligation and a mitzvah even after the time of the midbar. As the Rambam says, Be'im ho yunoisim ha-migdosh mimokim l'mokim. Now, when you carry the Migdash from place to place, so then you need to carry the still a mitzvah. Is move on, ados is a mitzvah l'deiros. So therefore it's understood that this is a mitzvah for generation. So basically, the Rambam's proof from this pasuk is that it's a mitzvah l'deiros. That's why he brings down the story. But the Rebbe says, it's very difficult to say this is the entire reason why the Rambam is just bringing down the story with Uzzah to teach us that there was a mitzvah because of l'deiros. But that's the whole reason that we don't understand. Why does the Rambam bring different psukim? In his hand, in the Yad HaChazaka, in the Rambam, he brings Tafke, the proof from the David and Uzzah. B'shas, in Sefer HaMitzvahs, bring the Rambam andere rayas, but in the book of Mitzvahs, the Rambam brings different rayas. Before, we brought from, when Yoshio hid the Aron, he says you don't have any more Masa Bekosev. So that was the evidence that the proof that it applied later on. So why is the Rambam bringing a different raya than he brought in Sefer HaMitzvahs? So, number one. But another thing the Rebbe says, from Pashtus Loshen HaRambam, the simple language of the Rambam, befrat von dem was is koipel nocham, and the fact that he repeats again, noch und zogen lifisha chashachach, after he says, and because he forgot, and that's why they suffered that breach with Uzzah. He says, Elam mitzvah l'nosei al hakosef. It's a mitzvah to carry on the kosef. So he's sort of adding a new dimension. Now, we already said that when you carry it, you have to be, Memokeh has to be on the kosef. And then if he wants to add the story with Uzzah, it always applies. Why does he have to start over again and say, Elam mitzvah l'nosei al hakosef? We know already. Is verstandig as the Rambam is oisen bringen rayis about the product. That actually the Rambam wants to bring proof for two aspects over here. He says in the beginning of the halacha, there is one thing that he says you're not allowed to do, and the one other thing is he says what you right way, what you should be doing. How does the Rambam start the halacha? And he brings the two evidence for those two halachas. That's the wording in the Rambam. Evder shlila, on the negative, what he says you're not allowed to do. Ein malichnoi loy ala behema, v'loy al ha'agolos. You can't lead it not on the behema, not on the ha'agolos. For that, he brings the proof, bring the deraya, ulefisha shochach David v'nosa al hagola nifratz perez be'uza, because David forgot and he did carry it on the wagon. That's why there was a breach in Uzzah. That's why Uzzah died. So that proves the first part, that the negative, that you're not allowed to carry the hagolas. Bringt deraya. On oilem zweiten prat, dem chiv. And then he adds, Ela mitzvah lenotle ala kosef, but it's a mitzvah to carry it on the shoulder. Firter ois. Over here he says, what's the proof? Doesn't say you have to carry it on the shoulder because you see Uzzah died. No, he brings another pussy. Shenemar Ki avodas hakodesh alei b'kosev yiso, because the pasuk in Chumash says they have to carry it on the shoulders. The Rambam splits up. You see, in the Rambam he splits up two psukim. For the first part that you're not allowed to carry on the wagon, you're not put on the wagon, he brings because there was a mistake that David made, and that's why there was a breach in Uzzah. And for the other part that he says that it's a mitzvah to put on the shoulder, it brings the pasuk. So basically, it's not just to say, as the Rebbe wanted to suggest, that it's a mitzvah l'doros. We see that there's a split into two parts over here. The Rambam is basically saying over here, in the language of the Rambam, we see that the Rambam is saying it two things. There is one problem with putting the Aron on a wagon. That's the negative. You can't do that. There's another issue that you must carry the Aron on the shoulders. Two separate issues. And the question really becomes, how does the Rambam know that there's two issues? Now the pasuk says that they didn't give them wagons. One can argue that means not to carry. And the second part of the pasuk says, "Bakosev yiso." That's the positive that they have to carry on the shoulders. These are the two parts of the pasuk. The pasuk says you didn't give them agolas. That means you can't carry them. And then the pasuk says, "Bakosev yiso." But the Rebbe's issue is, who tells us that these are two separate inyonim? That there's two separate ideas. Maybe the reason why he didn't give them the agola is because there's only one thing here. Maybe there's only one thing that you have to carry it on the shoulders. And because you have to carry it on the shoulders, that's why there's no agolas over there, because you have to carry it on the shoulders. Not that there's a separate idea of not putting it on the wagons. Because if you read the pasuk, it says he didn't give them the wagons to the Bnei Kos, ki avodas hakodesh bakosev yiso, because They have to put it on the shoulder, and therefore they don't have agolis. But here in the Rambam, the way that I've explained, we see there's two things here. First, he says can't put it on the agolis, and that's why the Rambam brings the proof from Uzzah, from David forgetting, and then another, the positive, because it says Bakosik Yisou. And for this, it brings the Bnei Kohos. How does the Rambam know this? But therefore, we're first the Rebbe's question now. Pavos learn the Rambam. Why does the Rambam learn? As that you're not allowed to lead the Aron, not on top of the animal, not on top of the wagon. That this is a separate matter. Unas defar nifras peretz be'uza for violating that part. For David forgetting, that's why the Peretz Be'uzah. Not only does the Rambam say that there are two aspects, but he says this first. And that the Rambam brings before the positive mitzvah. It says in the pasuk that you carry in the shoulders. So the Rambam doesn't start off by saying you have to carry in the shoulders and then not to put it on the wagons. He makes the main thing. He brings down not putting it on the wagons. And then he brings the second thing is that it has to be on the shoulder. And this is different than the simple meaning of the pasuk. Or need be passed to saksuvim, and not as the simple meaning in the verse. As this is not a tetzor. The fact they don't have a golus is not by itself. It's not that you can't put it on the golus. It's only a consequence. Because you have to carry it with the shoulders. They don't get a golus. The nifratz nor the far, and in Uzzah, it's not because they put it on the agolos. Maybe the reason the pashto pshat in the pasuk is that you have to carry by the shoulders. How do we know that Uzzah was killed because they put it in the agolos? Uzzah was killed because they weren't carrying on the shoulder. Benifras nor the far was nit mekayim given the mitzvah because of his soul. Just the reason that was a breach in Uzzah, there's only one mitzvah. You carry on the shoulder and didn't carry on the shoulder. And the Rambam says, no, it was because they put it on the wagon. And that's when Nivra Ura is separately then carrying on the shoulder. Why does the Rambam learn that way? Now, the Rebbe quoted, so that's basically, the Rambam is mashma that there's two aspects over here. There is the aspect of not putting it on the wagon, and there's another aspect of carrying it on the shoulder. And the reason why Uzzah was breached was because they put it on the wagon. The Rebbe says, how does the Rambam know this, that this is in Pashtus? What was the problem about Uzzah over there? It wasn't that David HaMelech put it on the wagon, it's because they didn't carry it on the shoulders. And that's why there was a breach in Uzzah. How does he know it's a separate thing? The Rebbe suggests now maybe the Rambam learns that from the Medrash, in which it says that you shouldn't put it on the wagon. In Medrash now, in the above Medrash that we quoted before, the Medrash Rebbe, it says very clearly, Shaloi hoya lehem reshus litein ha'orein al hagolah. They didn't have permission to put the Aron on a wagon. So it says, doesn't say because they were only supposed to carry, they had no right to put. The Rebbe learned from that the main mitzvah is for the Aron. It says there they didn't have permission to put it on the wagon, the Aron. But aber der Medrash bringt then the Raya the Mascholos HaKosov Parsha Seder. But where does he bring the proof for this, that you can't put in the wagon? Is the Pasuk in our Parsha, Shenemar, V'livinei kohos le'nosan goyim. So that what tells that's what the Medrash proves, that you don't have a right to put it uh, on the wagon, because it says that he didn't give them agolis. But so in the Medrash, we learn that could be there's two parts to it. Naso and agolis means there's the negative. They weren't given agolis, that you're not allowed to put in agolis. Then we have the positive, because of Yisod. We're going to say these are two separate, the Medrash learns that way. So in the Medrash, we see that you're not allowed to put something on the Aron on the wagon. It's separate because it says Luchos Naso. But the Rambam, we have a hard time explaining that he learns it from the pasuk of the Luchos, because the Rambam brings for that detail that you're not allowed to put it on the wagon. The Rambam learns that detail from what happened by Uzzah, by David HaMelech, that he forgot. And only the mitzvah of Bakos of Yisou, he learns from the pasuk. So that means that the Rambam doesn't learn that Livnei Kohos is separate. The Rambam learns the pasuk Livnei Kohos, Bakos of Yisou, means there's only a mitzvah to carry it on the shoulder. And because there's a mitzvah to carry on the shoulder, that's why they weren't given agolos. Not that not putting on the agolos is a separate idea over here, not to put the Aron on the agolos. So the Medrash could learn that way. But since the Rambam brings evidence that not to put on the agolos, not from the possible Nekhos Leinosan, he brings the story of Uzzah. That means that Rambam learns the possible Nekhos Leinosan agolos as a result. Kibakoy Avedis Hakodesh Bakosef Yisou is the reason, and therefore they have no agolos, but not as a separate thing. That's why the Rambam has to bring the evidence from Uzzah, from David HaMelech for getting it. So, in that case, since the pasuk doesn't make that distinction, and the Rambam clearly does not make that distinction, because he doesn't bring a proof from Livnei Kohos Leinosan that you're not allowed to carry it. So how according to the Rambam, we're saying these two differences that we learned this from Uzzah, but how are we going to explain the pasuk? Let's look inside. The Medrash bringt them the Raya von Ascholos HaKosim Parshas Seinu Shemel L'Nikos Leinosan Geimer. So, okay, so therefore the Medrash says there's a problem of putting the Aron on an Agola. The Rambam aber bringt nicht the Raya. He doesn't bring the Raya. That because the pasuk says Nikos Leinosan. Nor what is Rambam Ufish Shakach David? He brings evidence from the story of David that David forgot. But so it's not understood. Why does he have to bring that proof? It means because the pasuk doesn't say this. If the Rambam accepts, it's his view, as from the beginning of the pasuk, that when it says is nitokin hechnech. So from that we have no evidence as that there's something a negative that we're not allowed to carry it or put it onto the wagon. And the reason why we can't learn from that is that pasuk is mamshik, because the pasuk itself tells us this is not separate. It says ki, as the time of them is. Why didn't they not give him? It gives you the reasoning. Because if he's so, because the whole mitzvah is not a negative of not putting on the wagon. It's all about you have to carry it on the shoulder. That's the reason. Ki, the pasuk says. That's why they weren't given agolos. Not that there is a separate prohibition of not to put it on the agolos. Vos is the Hadgosha. Uvaman is Raya. So what is the Rambam emphasizing? Where does he have the proof? Das ist ein besonderer Zivui und kommt früher für den Zivui because of so that this is something separate and that it comes before because of so. Maybe by Uzzah they were punished because they were supposed to carry it on their shoulder. Not that there is a separate new issue of not putting the Aron on the Agola. Where is he taking this from? Why don't we say they were punished because, and also the Rambam says first, there's one issue not to put it on the wagon. And then there's a issue of having to carry it on the shoulders. Where does the Rambam take this from? So the first question of the Rebbe is that while in the Rambam, it seems clearly that the Rambam is dividing up the laws of the Aron in two parts, that one, you're not allowed to put it on a wagon, and two, which we have a proof from Uzzah, and two, that you have to carry it on the shoulder. Why does the Rambam have to divide it that way? And where is the source for this? And why bring that down part first? And the Rebbe says from the Medrash, it's not a question. It's not because the Medrash assumes that these things are not connected. The key is two separate inyanim. But evidently, since the Rambam does not bring the possible and if they cost lenos nagolis like the Medrash, he learns the Pashtak Suvim that there's only one issue here. So why does he emphasize that there's an issue of not putting in the agolis, which we learn from Uzzah, and then a second part, which is that you have to carry it on the shoulder? That's one question that the Rebbe has in this law. Another question over here we have to understand that's asked by the Radbas. Pavoso the Rambam arrangestellt the Luchos wegen Nesias in the Luchos Klei HaMikdash. Why did the Rambam place the laws about carrying the Aron in the laws of the vessels of the Mikdash? Wo read in Perek Aleph, in the first chapter, he talks wegen Asiyas Shemen HaMishcha was man tut damit. Over there he says what you do with the how you make the anointment oil and what you do with it. Beperek Beis wegen Asiyas Ketoides, then he talks about making the incense. Bashaychel, what's connected to that. That's Aleph and Beis. So why does he start now talking about carrying the Aron? L'chayre hat es gedarft stellen in the weite dicke Prokim, seemingly that he should have written it in the later on chapters. In Perek Gimel, wegen the Levim Avidoso. In the third chapter, when he talks about the Levim and their service, or that in Perek Daled, wegen the Kohanim, or in the fourth chapter, when he talks about the Kohanim. So why does the Rambam place it over here? In the 12th halacha in Perek Beis. So that's the question that the Radvaz asked. So that's another question. Why is it placed over here? These are all going to be used as the explanation to give us an answer to the original question, to the distinguish between the Aron and the other kelim. Another question here. The Rambam says when you carry the Aron, it doesn't say who carries the Aron. The Rambam, the man bechlal nit in der halacha, wer es hat gedarf tragen am Aron. It doesn't say who's carrying the Aron. He just says in a general way, he said when you lead the Aron, you don't put him on the wagons, but you carry it on the shoulder. Why does he not translate that this is the mitzvah for the Kohanim, as there is Mevar Beprot in Sefer HaMitzvahs, as he explains in detail in Sefer HaMitzvahs, that even though it was given to the Levi because there was not enough Kohanim, but he should say that this is the mitzvah of the Kohanim. From them is, as we see in Tanakh, the place that the Kohanim were the ones that Noisei Ha'arim were carrying the Aron. From them is verstandig, from this is understood, the Rambam, the Aldasa Rambam, is der Maser Be'arim Be'kosif nit a prat in Chiyuva Gabra. That carrying is not a detail on the person, the obligation of the person to who to carry it. It's something about the Aron, nor adin in der Chefze von Aron und Nisiyose. But it's a halacha in the object of the Aron, how it's to be carried. This idea that we're discussing over here, carrying it on the shoulder is not an obligation, who carries it, but that the Aron needs to be carried in a way. That's why there's no mention of the Leviim, as the Rebbe will explain now in detail, beginning with Ois Dalet. Ois Dalet. The Rebbe explains now that all the vessels needed to be moved from place to place through the various families, Gershon, Kos, and Merori. But in addition to that, the Aron needed a place even while it was being carried. Just like the Aron has a place in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it needs a place while it's being moved. What's the place? The place is because of. Let's look inside. The Hasbara, the explanation is, in Avodas HaLevim, the Avodas of Levim, Bizman Shoy Noisim HaMikdash Memokim Lemokim, at the time that they were carrying the Mikdash from place to place, the Avodas HaMasa Tzufidnim Memokim Lemokim, the work of the load to carry from place to place, is given to Yefanim. There were two ways in there. There was Masa B'nai Gershon or B'nai Merori. First, there was on one hand, we had the load of Gershon and Merori. They were carrying certain portions of the Mishkan, and they were carrying on wagons. Umasa B'nai Kahos, and then the sons of Kos, the Levim, because they carried all the vessels on the shoulder. These were the transportation means for the different parts of the Mishkan by the different families. But the Aron Ober is do adin in the Aron. By the Aron, there is another halacha, which is not halacha how to transfer it, but there's halacha in the Aron. Because if you so, carry it on the shoulder. This is der mokim ha'orim shas mizim noisim memokim lemokim. That becomes the place where the Aron is when you carry it from place to place. There's a spot where the Aron needs to be. The Aron has to be there. There's haste. Which means, kishem v'b'shas ha'chaniyah is faran der mokim ha'orim, just like at the time when they're camped, when they're stopped, when they're resting, there is the place of the Aron. And das is because the Kodesh which is in Kodesh HaKadoshim, al derech zeh, similar to this, when you carry the Aron from place to place, hot der Aron amokim yuchad al kosef, the Aron has a special place on the shoulder. And das deitet on the Rambam der mit. And this the Rambam points to by saying was schreibt the mitzvah behilchas nesiyas ha'aron in Seif Perik Beis von Hilchas Klei HaMikdash noch edere red wegen ha'ivdim vayv. He brings this down in the end of the second chapter of the vessel of the Mikdash before he talks about those who serve it. This becomes part of the vessel, the part of the Aron, not talking yet who serves it, not talking about the Gabra, we're talking about the Chefze in Migdash, not talking about the servant. Noch mehr. Der Mond bechlal nit wer es haben gedarf sein die Nese Aron. He doesn't mention at all who needed to carry the Aron. Das als is madgish. This all emphasizes as the Nesiyas Ha'aron bekosev that carrying the Aron on the shoulder is nit adin uprat in chiyuve hakabra. This is not a halacha when we say to carry it on the shoulder. It's not a halacha and a detail of the obligation who should carry it. We're not talking about the work in the mikdash. This is in Pedig base. That's only in Pedig Gimel. This emphasized that in the chefza, in the object klei hamikdash from Aron Gufa. Sizadin from mokim ha'oren. It is a halacha in the space of the Aron. B'shas memfir der Aron is das al hakosef. When you lead the Aron, the place is on the kosef. So this is the Rambam's placing of this halacha. And the Rambam view is that this is a din in the Aron, that where is the place of the Aron when it's being led is on the shoulder. So transferring various different ways, but here we're talking about the place. The place is on the shoulder. That becomes the place, the chepza, where the Aron is stationed. I say. So now the Rebbe explains the difference between the other Klei HaKodesh and the Aron that they carried, whether it was just the transferring or it provided a place. The other Klei HaKodesh were transferred by the Bnei Kahos, but the Bakosef you saw that was his place, that was with the Aron. Let's look inside. Hey, is moving the pashtus. Based on this, it's very simply understood. Then the chiluk zwischen the andere klei hakodesh b'masse b'nei kahos, the difference between the other klei hakodesh when the b'nei kahos carried umasse ha'orin b'kosif, and that they carried the orin on the shoulder. The masse von the andere klei hakodesh b'kosif al yidei b'nei kahos, carrying the other vessels, when they carried on the shoulder by the Bnei Chos, is in themselves geder v'nisiyas sharchel k'hamikdash ba'agolois al yidei Bnei Gershon Bnei Merari. It's in the same definition. It's just same as the carrying of the rest of the parts of the Mikdash on the wagons by Bnei Gershon Bnei Merari. They carried Bekosev, the other, besides the Aron, they carried Bekosef, and the other ones they carried in the wagon, but it's the same. They were just transferring. Und das ist nicht a prat in the Chelke HaMikdash Gufa. It's not a detail in the parts of the Mikdash, the Menorah, the Shulchan. They weren't, it was just a transferring from place to place, and it wasn't that the place of the Menorah, the Shulchan became the shoulder. No, below is they're open. What happened by the other Klei HaKodesh is only in the way for Nisios V'avarosim Mokum L'mokum. How we carried and we transferred it from place to place from Oil Moed. How the Oil Moed and all the Kelo, how they were transferred. P'shem v'nisiyas chelka mishkan shal yidei b'nei Gershon u'b'nei Merari. Is nita mitzvah l'doidos, just as carrying the parts of the Mishkan, which b'nei Gershon u'b'nei Merari is not the mitzvah generation. Then when he's from a kohen midbar, once you left the place of the midbar, al derech is the nisiyas the kosel the b'nei kos for the under the klei kodesh nita mitzvah l'doidos. Similarly, is carrying on the shoulder to the Bnei Kos from the other Klei HaKodesh, it's not a generational mitzvah, it's just for the time. The Bnei Gershon and Merari were carrying in the time when they were traveling them in the Midbar, but after that, it doesn't apply. Chotch the Klei HaMikdash seine Gewem bebeis HaMikdash euch noch dem wieder Oil Moed Korosha Badonov seine Nignes geworden. Even though the other vessels of the Mikdash, they remained in the Beis HaMikdash, even after the Almoed itself, Koroshev and Adonov, were hidden. So while the temporary oil moyed and the kroshim, they were hidden, but the other kelim stayed. But yet there was no mitzvah anymore over there. That was only for the transferring while there was an oil moyed. But once we finished with the oil moyed and they were hidden and put away and no longer there was no more mitzvah to transfer any parts of the oil moed. The kelim were still there, but there's no more mitzvah. Transferring stopped. That mitzvah ceased. But this that we're saying that you carry on the shoulder as it pertains to the Aron is ba'achef to the Aron. That's the object of the Aron. Nit nor a prat. It's not only a detail in a halacha how to transport it from place to place. It becomes a part of where the place of the Aron needs to be. Is muvan ados is nitoli in the mokum musman. It's not hinged on the place and the time that they were carrying the mikdash from place to place. Because it's a matter of having a place, not in the Heftzim from Aron. But this was the object of the Aron. The Mela calls Manas is the Aron, along with the Aron is the Chiyu from the Koimei. There is an obligation for this place. If there is an Aron, you have to have it in this place. The Beis Hamikdash b'Kodesh HaKadoshim, in Beis Hamikdash Kadoshim, and we lead it from place to place, it goes on the shoulder. So the Rebbe continues to explain that the Oizgetelkeit von Aron legabe de andere Klei HaKodesh b'masse b'nei Kohos, the difference of the Aron, when you measure it relative to the other holy vessels that the b'nei Kohos carried, Learn the Rambam Arois from the Medrash Chazal Hanal Gufa, from the Medrashim of our sages that mentioned before themselves. Because here the issue becomes, where does the Rambam know this from? The Rebbe is saying that he learns it from the statements and the Medrash of the Chazal. About the Meile von Kohos, as specified in the Medrash Rebbe. What was the advantage can cause is Toyen Ha'oren Shashom HaTorah. He carries the Oren in which the Torah is. Chod zehom getrogen bekosif euch shar klei HaKodesh. Although they were carrying on their shoulders also the other holy vessels. And yet he says the Aron that the Torah was there, that's what the Medrash says, is der vom verstandig, so from this it's understood, as the Siyas Aron Bekosif, that carrying the Aron on the shoulder is nit nor mitzadem, but it is einer from the Klei HaKodesh, is not only because of the fact it's one of the holy vessels, no varshom HaTorah, because the Torah is there. Luchos, the Luchos and the Sefer Torah that was actually in the Aron itself, as the Gemara Baba Basra that have a reference to, that was also in the Aron. So the difference and the uniqueness of carrying the Aron is because the Aron contained in it the Torah. Chashivus v'kobed ha-Torah fodert, the importance and to give honor, respect for the Torah requires, as alamo, that always, afilu b'shaser gate, even at the time that it's traveling, mefirtem, he's being led, from ein ort zu zweiten, from one place to another, darfer euch damot hob mamokem yuchad, then too, the Aron needs a specifically a specialized place for the Aron. V'yeshleimar, and the Rebbe says, we can say, Ados is euch einer von the timing was der Rambam bringt in der Halacha behilchus Klei HaMikdash. That's why This is one of the reasons Rambam in the laws of Klei Mikdash, Oich di Shlila, also the negative of not, Ein Malichin Oisad Lo Yala Behema V'Lo Yala Golis, not let it, not on the Hema, not on the wagons, bring the Raya, Ulifisha Shokach V'Noso, as no Shokach David V'Noso Al Hagola. And since David, because he forgot, and he carried it on the wagon, Nifratz Paras Be'Uza, that was the cause that there was the breach in Uza. So what is we saying here? Damit wird gebracht. This brings out as mishas mentrokt dem Aron al Agola, when you carry the Aron on the Agola, is man nit nor mevatla mitzvah. You're not only negating and wasting a mitzvah from the sea because of two carry on the shoulder, nor mizmevatel dem inyan hakvius mokim von Aron. But what you're doing is you're negating, you're taking away the set place for the Aron Torah. Heilocha, the Torah. Why? Because Heilocha al gabe behema oder al agolis is madgish dem heipach from kviyus mokim. When you lead the Aron on top of the behema or on wagons, that emphasizes the opposite from having a set place for the Aron. It becomes like any other package you're carrying on the agola, on the animal. Und der Inyan was nosa lagola, was is heipach covered that Torah. And because of this aspect of carrying on the agola, not for not mekayim zayin the mitzvah of carrying on the shoulder, but for the disrespect and the opposite of the honor of the Torah, just putting him in together with the other packages that you carry on the agola, hat gebracht zu nifras peretz be'uza. That brought the breach in uza. So the fact that we are talking about in the Mamor Chazal, especially for the honor of the Torah, Shema Torah tells us there's something unique about the Torah, that Torah requires a special place. And when you just put the Torah or anywhere else, it's a disrespect to the Torah, and that's why there was the punishment. Und das Gufa is der Tam, and this itself is the reason for was the Rambam is magdim the Shlila. That is the reason why the Rambam first brings down the negative, the ein malichin oisachulu, fardem chiyuv mitzvah nedoitloi ala kosef. First, he brings down that you're not allowed to carry him or lead him by way of the animal or the wagon, and then he says the mitzvah to carry on the shoulder. So Madgiv he wants to emphasize as the Isur is nit at the Tzor from the mitzvah because of Yisov. It emphasizes the prohibition of carrying on the wagon is not a result because you have to carry the mitzvah because of Yisov, so therefore you're not allowed to carry in the wagon. No. There's a separate Isur, not a bezunder Isur. There is a problem carrying a Sefer Torah, the Aron with the Sefer Torah, separate Isur mitzad, them zilzul b'koved Torah. This is a degradation, a cheapening the honor of the Torah to just carry it in the cup. That's why you get a special punishment. Nifratz peretz be'uza, it was breached be'uza. The Rambam explains that this is not just not doing an assay. We don't find that for not doing an assay, there shall be a breach be'uza. The Rambam is explaining why is nifratz peretz be'uza, because they weren't supposed to carry it on the wagon, because this has a separate mitzvah of not cheapening to respect the Torah, and putting it on the wagon was a disrespect. For a disrespect, you get a punishment that uza nifratz peretz be'uza. That would not be if it was just not being mekayim a regel mitzvah say. And the Rambam introduces this first because he wants to clarify that this is something different than the mitzvah of carrying by the shoulder. Not putting it on the wagon is not because you have to carry it on the shoulder, but there's a separate prohibition against putting the Aron on top of a wagon, because that would be a disrespect. The Rambam knows this because that's the Medrash says, that you're not allowed to put it on the wagon because of the honor of the Torah, because the Luchos and the Torah are there. So this explains the order of the Rambam, first the Shlila, and the source from where the Rambam takes us. Zayin. So, what is the reason that we're saying that this is so important, that the respect for the Torah, and there's a punishment for that, and that's the issue here? So the Rebbe says we can learn it from the halachas and the Rambam with regards to Sefer Torah, in which we see that the Torah has to be handled respectfully. You can't just carry it on top of the animal. Zayin. Oy Zayin. So the Rebbe says, Atam v'rai l'chol anal, a reason and also proof for all the above. Kemen arislan for Rambam gufa b'soifil Sefer Torah. We can actually learn this from the Rambam itself in the end of the laws of Sefer Torah. B'negeya to covered from Sefer Torah as it pertains to the respect we have to give to Sefer Torah. And this is what the Rambam writes. Mitzvah liyachid l'Sefer Torah mokim. It is a mitzvah to designate a place for the Sefer Torah. Ulechabdei, to honor it. Ulahadrei, and to beautify it. Respect it. Yoiser midai, more than necessary, meaning all the ways. The respect for a Sefer Torah. Dvorim shebeluchis habris hein shebechol Sefer Torah, because the words of the tablets of the covenant, they are in each Sefer and Sefer. So that's what the Sefer Torah is. That's what the Rambam writes, how we should designate a Sefer Torah, a place to honor it and to adorn it more than everything else. L'chayre is nit verstandig. This seems to be not understood. Od the halacha zog der Rambam korev zum siyum haperik. The Rambam only tells us about this, about the Sefer Torah, almost at the end of the chapter. Doesn't mention it earlier, only in the Friedrich halachas, but in the previous halachas, read the Rambam, kama v'kama protedinim, when he gets to cover Sefer Torah, he speaks about many, many details of the dinim as it pertains to the Sefer Torah. He talks about onimdik from halacha base, starting in halacha base. Sefer Torah, he writes kosher, a kosher Sefer Torah, neigim be'kedusha yisayda v'kovet gadol. We conduct ourselves with additional, extra sanctity and great honor. Be as vers virtuis in halacha tes till he concludes in halacha 9. Kol Sefer Torah k'shemahalach, anybody who sees a Sefer Torah as it's being led, Chayiv lamed niponim, has to stand up before the Sefer Torah. V'yu hakoilem dim, and everybody stays up at sheyamid zeh shehu mahalach boi chulu, until the one who's walking stops. As long the whole time is going, you need to stand up. So how does it fitting that he starts with Locha Yud, Kilu v'dosis anayirin, as if starting something new subject. Mitzvah liyached l'Sefer Torah mokim. It's a mitzvah to designate for the Sefer Torah a place, u'lechabdei u'lehadrei, to honor it, to adorn it, etc. Und is noch meisif. Dvarim shebeluchas habris heinim shel Sefer Sefer. The words of the covenant, of the tablet, in the covenant, those are never Sefer. Why is he all of a sudden saying this when we've been talking about honoring the Sefer Torah the whole time? The Rebbe wants to point out there's two separate categories. There's one category that the people needs to honor the Sefer Torah. That's what the Rambam is talking till then. The other aspect is the Sefer Torah in of itself demands that it needs to be in a space. That's what the Rebbe says. But first the Rebbe asks, the same question in the next halach. So in this halach we're asking, why is the Rambam starting off all of a sudden? There's a mitzvah to honor the Sefer Torah more, and the words of the Luchos. We've been talking about this all the halachas. In the next halacha, we can also ask the same question in Rambam. The last halacha from the Perek, which is the last halacha of this chapter.
And this is the Rambam's language, quoting the Rambam. A person was traveling from place to place, and he has a Sefer Torah with him. Don't put the Sefer Torah into a sack, put it on top of the donkey, and then you ride on the donkey. But what you need to do is you put it in your inside pocket on your lap next to your heart. And you're riding on the behem and going out. That's how you treat the Sefer Torah. Here we have a similar question. That din b'midavhaltna Sefer Torah b'shas mirechev al chamoir. This halacha, how you need to hold a Sefer Torah when you're riding a donkey, what merer angepasst be'emshach to the Friedrich halachas. Seemingly would be fitting to the previous halachas. Wo redt wegen die protidinim. Over there he talks about the details of the halachas. How you need to conduct with a Sefer Torah. When you enter a bathhouse, should have spoken over there. Similar, the prohibition to sit on a bed which has a Sefer Torah on the bed. Not allowed to sit at the same place that there's Sefer Torah. Pavosh told the Rambam dem din esh b'sima perek. Why does the Rambam place this halacha at the end of the perek? Noch der halacha for mitzvah liyachel l'Sefer Torah mokim l'chav dechulu. After he brings down the halacha right beforehand, towards the end of the perek, that is a mitzvah to designate a Sefer Torah place and to honor it. And then it says, if you're traveling, don't put it underneath by the sack of the donkey, but put it on the top next to you. All telling us there's something about these halachas. It's a din in the Sefer Torah, as the Rebbe will explain. Euch darf man verstehen. Also need to understand, from wann nimmt der Rambam dem din, where does the Rambam take and know this halacha, as manichel b'cheker keneged libay v'hu reichev chulu, that he puts it next to his heart while he's riding. What's the halacha? Bepashtus. Is there mocker, the Meforshim Zogun, simply speaking, the sources as Meforshim bring down, for Masechta Brachas. Come Masechta Brachas. Over there it says, HaMoilich HaTzomes V'mokim L'mokim, one who is leading bones from a deceased, from place to place. How does it lead them? Don't put him into a bag, into this leather bag. And put him on the donkey and should ride over there. That would be conducting himself a degrading way with his bones. Says the Gemara there, Kach Amru, Sefer Torah, the same thing about Sefer Torah. So this is the source of the Rambam. That's the main thing, that you don't put it underneath. Aber dort steht nicht der Prat, as maniche becheke keneged libay, that you put it in your lap, by your heart, opposite your heart, in your bosom, opposite your heart. Why? Where does the Rambam take that? So, while in the Gemara, the Mefarshim say that by bones you can't just put it into the sack, that's the first part. But where's the source for the second part? Mein Loshen Anal, there was a similar Loshen like that, state Legabit Tefillin. It says with regards to Tefillin. Aber dort redt sich nicht wegen Halich zel Melmoker Lemoker. Over there it doesn't speaking about going from place to place, nor when Chilza B'Shul Beis HaKisei, when you remove them, when you go into the Beis HaKisei, in order not to be in a degrading way, so don't keep your tefillin on you, but you fold them up and you put them into your bosom. We're not talking about when you're traveling. So what's the source of the Rambam not to take? So the Rebbe is bringing out several points over here. The order which the Rambam puts in the halachas about honoring a Sefer Torah to give us special place for him. He puts it in the end of the halachas. And then even further, he puts down the halacha that the going from place to place, you don't put it in a sack, but you put it next to your heart in the chekoi. Where does the Rambam? But then why does the Rambam put it over there when the Rambam has been discussing the laws of honoring a Sefer Torah beforehand, and he adds over here, these are the Luchos Sabris. Now, even though in the Gemara we have the detail with regards to bones, and it says the same thing as Sefer Torah, that you don't put them into the sack on the Chamoir, but the second detail, where do we find that? So the Rebbe says now, in Oisches explaining this. Oisches. The Rebbe is going to say that there's a separate section here for the special honor for the Sefer Torah, not that the person has to, but the special honor for the Torah, Sefer Torah in of itself, is das Borobas, a ches. In the halachas, in the Perek Bizdar Halacha Yud, in the laws of the chapter until Halacha Yud, mitzvah liyachid chulu, mitzvah to designate, read the Rambam beikar vek dichyu v'kovet Sefer Torah. The Rambam is mainly talking about the obligation to honor the Sefer Torah, which apply to the person. The person should know that you need to conduct yourself. You conduct yourself with additional sanctity and great honor. In Halacha Yud aber fangt Aron an ein Inyan. In Halacha Yud he starts a new subject. Mitzvah liyachid l'Sefer Torah mokum. It's a mitzvah to designate for the Sefer Torah place, ulachabdei ulahadrei, yoser midai, to honor it and to adorn it more than necessary. Because the words of the tablets of the covenant are in each Sefer. Das heißt, here we're starting to discuss the law of honor because of the object of the Sefer Torah. Since the words of the Luchos of the covenant are in each Sefer, the Rebbe, and therefore, just like the Aron, because it contained the tablets of the covenant in the Luchos. There is a place, or halacha, that it needs to be in a place because of the honor of Torah. Similarly, also the object of the Sefer Torah, farana mitzvah. There's a mitzvah liyachid l'Sefer Torah mokim. Sefer Torah needs a place. Ulachabdichul. Oich dem mokim mechabed zayin. Not only the Sefer Torah, you have to honor the place. There's a place for the Sefer Torah, and to designate the place. And it's because that's the Luchos that we know, that the Luchos had a special place because you needed to honor them. So they needed a special place. And you couldn't just bring them on the Agola and everything else. As we said, not to carry Los Nagolis. The Rambam said that's why Ba'uza. And this is also that follows the law in the Rambam that follows. That going from place to place, while you have a Sefer Torah with you, that also when you go from place to place, there is a halacha of place in the Chefza from Sefer Torah, the object of the Sefer Torah. And therefore, if there is no worry over there that you're afraid, that's a different story, but you put it just like by the Aron, which contained Luchos Sabris. Just like over there's a halacha of space. That the place needs to be miyuchat for this Aron, for the Luchos Sabris, which are the Aron. So too, when we lead the Sefer Torah from place to place, you need to carry it in your lap on the chekoi. That's the place. Just like the Aron needed to be on the kosef, you have to keep it on the chekoi, and that's why the Rambam brings this down in the end of the halachas, because this is the key to this point that the Rebbe is bringing that we see in the laws of Sefer Torah. Also, that the Aron had a special place, and the two halachas we learn out were first from not giving agolis, that's only from the negative, not to disrespect the Torah, and then we have the mitzvah of Luchos. Uzzah was punished because of disrespect. And the Rambam learns this from the Medrash, because in the Medrash it says that the special covet that you're supposed to not carry this because it has the Luchos Habris. It's tone. It's that's what the Kahos carry. It's all a matter of respect. And now the Rebbe says this coincides and this fits also with Pnimiyas HaTorah. Oistes. Here too, we see how it fits the revealed part of Torah with the inner part of Torah. As we spoke many times, so we see that everything fits together. Nigleh the Torah with the Pnimiyas HaTorah, with the inner part of Torah. As we spoke many times, as we bald Nigleh Pnimiyas HaTorah, werden verglichen zu Aguf und Neshama, the revealed and inner part of Torah are being compared to a body and a soul. Is kishem with their guf is masim bechol protov to the neshama. Was is melubishim just like the body is fitting in all details of the body to the soul which is rest in the body. So similar to this, the soul of Torah, the body of Torah, which is the Nigleh of the Torah, Behesem fits to the inyan ubiyur nishmos l'rayah, so fits to the idea and the explanation as it is in the soul of Torah. So the Nigleh fits to the Pnimis HaTorah. Chassidus is mevayer. So what do we see in Chassidus in the nishmos l'rayah? So is mevayer as their tam of Masa Aron Bekosov is why did you carry the Aron on the shoulder? Is weil der Inyan von Aron is the Luchos Habris Shaboy. Is because the Aron, what is the Aron? It is the covenant of the tablets of the covenant that are contained inside the Aron. Und the Luchos in themselves, Zanekuli Ponim. It's all face. There's no back of the Luchos. Varum Mizom Mizaim Ksuvim. They're written through and through from both sides. Mishnei v'reim from both sides. There is no front and back. There's no back over there in the Luchos. But the Inyan begashmi is nemtzach derfun. How does this physically get to the Luchos? Comes from the fact was beruchnis seinen de Luchos beginnes ponim del mailo. That spiritually these Luchos are the face of above. They're ponim of above. In welches is nito came there is no level of back in that level upon it. And that's for that reason the Aron needs to go on the shoulder. Because the Luchos that are in the Aron is mechaber umiyached oich dikasfayim so avodas hakodesh b'chinas ponim. We connect and we unite the shoulders in which you're carrying the Luchos to the holy service, to the b'chinas ponim. By carrying it, you're uniting it. And those are the time of us Nesias Aron is canal from Rambam Ba'ifim, and this is also the reason that the way they carried the Aron. So the Rambam says, "Ba'ifim ponim keneget ponim, ufneihem lifnim," face to face, which means the face of those who were carrying were to the inside, towards the Aron, and they were walking backwards. was vice that this is kuli ponim, which shows there was no back to the Aron, so you couldn't hold your back all to the face. Setman, as the time from the sea is Aron bekosef. So from this you see that carrying the Aron on the shoulders, this Tama didn't cover the Aron. It's not just plain halacha to honor the Aron, but shaykh euch to the andere Klei Hamikdash, which fits and is applicable to the other vessel of the Mikdash. Nor kosef is the mokoy miyuchad, but rather the shoulder is that special place was is masim betoichnei, which fits in content, that the meaning zum inyan Aron davke mitzad Luchos shabai, that it fits specifically to the Aron because of the tablets that are in the Aron. The Torah Kameshi Aron, Torah is in the Aron. That place is on the shoulders. But the fun kumt euch the halacha Nigleh Torah. That also brings us to the law in the revealed part of Torah. And the Nesiyas Aron bekosef, carrying the Aron on the shoulder, is adin was is verbunden with the Chefze von Aron. It's a halacha which is tied to the object of the Aron. The Chefze von Aron fodert amoka miyuchad. The object of the Aron itself demands a place designated special. Even when you carry it, not just in the Kodesh Kedoshim when it's resting, but when you're carrying it. It's an inyan Torah because the Torah that's in the Luchos. But this is because of Davke, the place is Davke by the shoulder. So here you see that what Chassidus explains, the idea of the Aron being on the koser to connect it to the level of Pnim and the level of Luchos, which is only Ponim, and that's why even the halach is that he walked backwards so that he faces over, because there's no back by the Luchos, to bring it to the shoulder to connect to the level of koser to the level of Ponim. And this is also the halacha that there is a special place for the Aron all the time. Oishud. Abizeh is mubenes the Sheikhos Miyuchedes from Parshas Naso to Zman Dersenu. We understand the special connection of the portion of Naso to the time of Matan Torah, because Parshas Naso leint man bismiches to Chag HaShavuos. This portion of Naso is read close to Shavuos, other in the Woch from Chag HaShavuos, sometimes in the week of Shavuos. The Shavuos is read in the Parshas Naso, other in the Woch, other in the Woch from Chag HaShavuos, on the week of Shavuos, or the Shabbos was far Chag HaShavuos, sometimes in the Shabbos that precedes. So Bamidbar and Naso are read before Shavuos. The Kvias B'Shana Zu Tovshin Daled Mem, that year it was the Kvias in Tovshin Daled Mem. This year it's Takim Pashas Naso in Tovshin Pei Vav. We're learning the sicha according to the schedule of Project Likutei Sichos. So it's Tovshin Pei Vav. Also, it's in the Shabbos Naso. That year it was Shabbos after Pashas Naso, but it's still next to it. What's the connection Naso with Matan Torah? So we're in Chassidus, explaining Chassidus in the Hanal in the above places when it talks about the Aron carrying on the kosev, the inyan from Amshachas b'chinas ponim, parbunim b'Torah. This idea of drawing down the level of ponim, which is associated, tied to the Torah, this was accomplished. The novelty came during Matan Torah. Then ponim b'ponim, dibra v'ayim. Hashem spoke to you face to face. Mishas kum der Zman from Matan Torah b'chol shana v'shana. When the time of Matan Torah comes every year, it's Azman Goromo. That's the time that is opportune time, as Yeder Yid Bakum Tesefes Koyach, that every Yid gets an additional power to poilem bazich, to influence and impact himself as Ozan Pon of the Aron, that his face, his penimis should be to the Aron. As penimis ritzoyne v'cheftzes Ozan Aron Elikus, that his inner wishes and desires should be only to godliness. The back should be for the outside. As the histamshus in the nyonim hamachrochim the kiyum ha'olam kiyum gufay, say nor behechlech, those uses that the person uses from matters that are necessary to the world to be sustained and for body to be sustained are just for it has to. Pnimis ve'enik, without inner, without pleasure. The pleasure and the pnimis is only in godliness. And that's the extra koyach we get, that it should be the ponim from the Luchos. And that's with the idea of the Aron, which in the sea is Aron, in the parsha that we lead on the Kosef and the Pnimius. Especially it starts during the 3 days of Agbola, was Kumen B'Shana Zu, Tovshin Dalad Mem, Noch Shabbos Parshas Nosius Rosh. They come after the Shabbos Parshas Nosius Rosh. Und durch der Hachone, and this year is before, but then it's the Chone, is Makabel HaTorah B'Simcha B'Nimis, we receive the Torah with joy and in an inner. This is Mesichas Motzei Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Nosi, Tovshin Lamed Tes, and Motzei Shabbos Kodesh Yud Shvat Tovshin Lamed.